What's going on, Bottom Line viewers? It's Mitch here of The Bottom Line View, back with another fantasy football video. In this video, I'm going to be ranking the top 50 wide receivers in fantasy football for your July fantasy football rankings. In this video, I'm going to be discussing all wide receivers in a PPR setting, in a PPR format. If you don't know what PPR is by now, it's a point per reception league. So every time a guy catches a pass, they get an extra point. If you're not in a PPR league, well, hang on, because I will be doing rankings for standard leagues. That's coming very shortly. But in this video, I'm going to be going from 1 to 50 on the top 50 wide receivers in fantasy football. Let's start off in tier number 1, and of course I rank all of my videos in tiers to make it simpler for you to know which players are in which categories and where you should be drafting them. So tier number 1 is Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, and Julio Jones. At number 1, I have Antonio Brown, and really you can't go wrong with any three of these players. They're all excellent. They're the three best receivers in the league, no matter way you stack it. But at number 1, I have Antonio Brown. A lot of people are slightly, for some reason, worried about Martavis Bryant coming back and stealing the shine from Antonio Brown. Don't be worried, because when Martavis Bryant was there with Antonio Brown, it was the best season Antonio Brown has ever had in his career. All it does for Brown is it helps him out. It actually helps him out. It lets him have less double teams. It lets him face, not as good players, because he's not having to face the safety in the corner all game long, because they also have to pay attention to Bryant. They also have to pay attention to Bell. So Antonio Brown's, this is only going to help him. At number 2, Odell Beckham. Beckham's awesome. I think this is going to be the best season Beckham's ever had, and that's actually why I have him slightly above Julio Jones. Very much the same way that Martavis Bryant helps Antonio Brown, I think Brandon Marshall is going to help Odell Beckham. I really like the Giants this year as a team. I think that translates also to fantasy. Their offense is going to be good. I love all the targets on their offense. And Odell Beckham, man, that guy, he's already had a start that's really been doubled by no one else in NFL history. This guy is legit. This guy is one day going to be claimed the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, and it may be as soon as this year. I would draft Odell slightly above Julio, because I think Odell has less chance of really regressing this season. I think he also has less chance of getting injured. I am a tiny bit worried with Julio Jones staying healthy. He does, more than the other two guys, Antonio Brown and Odell, have more of a track record of getting banged up. A slight hamstring pull here, a slight ankle injury here or two, right? So Julio Jones does have that history a little bit. That's why I rank him 3rd. But I still love Julio. He's still one of the best in the game. Probably talent-wise, he is the best in the game. It just, when it comes to fantasy, Antonio Brown is the man. He's Mr. Consistent. Odell, I think, is just going to be slightly better than Julio this year. And then Julio's right underneath that. I don't expect the same quality from the Atlanta offense this year as they had last year, but I expect Julio to be the one that maintains his quality from last season to this season. All three of these guys are safe. You can take them in whatever order you want. This is just the suggested order to go with. And tier number 2, I have AJ Green, Mike Evans, and Jordy Nelson. Starting off with AJ Green, he was on track to have an insane season last year. He was awesome when he did play. Now the problem is he was injured, and he got injured in the second half of the season, very much like a lot of the Cincinnati Bengals. This season he'll be back, he'll be healthy. I really like the Bengals offense. Andy Dalton will be back fully healthy. Tyler Eifert will be back. John Ross is going to help AJ Green out, and AJ Green is there. So this actually might be a case of, hey, there's other targets in the offense, so it might detract from AJ Green, and it might slightly, but I believe in AJ Green. Every single season he's been healthy, he's been a 1,000-yard receiver. That's consistency right there. He's going to score touchdowns. He's going to have huge games. The thing about AJ Green is he's one of these receivers that you could put in tier 1. He's just as good as Julio, as Odell, as Antonio Brown. It's just the last recent injured seasons where he's kind of slipped right below them. But I still believe in AJ Green as being a top-tier wide receiver, and I would definitely pick him in the first round, maybe even in the middle of this first round. The next receiver is Mike Evans. Mike Evans had a huge breakout season last year. He's going to have Deshaun Jackson on the opposite wide receiver as him. I think Mike Evans is going to have another great season. I expect the Bucs to take the next step in terms of their play. And I think Mike Evans is going to be a big reason why. Jameis Winston, I think, is becoming a better quarterback with every game and every snap he takes. So I think Mike Evans is only going to benefit from that. I wouldn't expect the same numbers as he had last year because those were ridiculous and he was really the only show in town. But I would still expect solid top tier wide receiver quality week in and week out from Mike Evans. This is a guy that's consistent. You watch this guy on tape and you say, man, oh man, this guy can go up and catch the ball against anyone. He can beat any corner in the league, and it really shows. I think Mike Evans is another solid, safe pick in the first round of your fantasy drafts in PPR. And then at number 6, and to finish off tier number 2, I have Jordy Nelson. Jordy Nelson, talk about Mr. Consistent. When he plays, he's great. Led the NFL in touchdowns last year. He has Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. He is Aaron Rodgers' go-to guy. He's Aaron Rodgers' favorite target ever. This guy, no matter how old he gets, you don't have to worry. He's going to continue to produce. I like him this year. Again, I think this is a guy that for whatever reason, be it that he's a little bit older or be it that maybe they still think that a white receiver can't do it. I mean, he's still good, man. And for whatever reason, people look at him and they don't put him in the same conversation as the Mike Evans and the AJ Greens of the world. He's there. He's there, and he might even be better. I mean, the consistency's off the charts, the catches, the touchdowns. You know this offense is going to produce week in and week out, and Jordy Nelson is the go-to receiver. So for me, Jordy Nelson, you should draft this guy at the late first, early second round. A lot of people are overlooking him in that range, and I feel like you shouldn't. Don't be one of those people that overlook Jordy Nelson this year. Tier number 3, I start off with T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. Hilton led the NFL in receiving yards last year. I think the Colts, Andrew Luck, going to have another good year this year, providing that he's healthy. That is a little bit skeptical there, but T.Y. Hilton, this is a guy that can go deep, and he proved that he could rack up a number of yards last year. This is another guy that a lot of people sleep on. In PPR leagues, I think he's slightly better in standard. He scores touchdowns, but he's also a big play receiver, so he doesn't really catch a ton of passes. That's why he's in tier number 3, but T.Y. Hilton's another safe pick in the second round, even as a wide receiver number 1 on your team. T.Y. Hilton's a good, solid addition. There's not really much else to say. He's Andrew Luck's number 1 go-to guy on a good offense, and he's going to get the ball. He's tough to handle because he's so quick and so fast. I think T.Y. Hilton's going to have another great season this year. Number 8, Michael Thomas. Believe it or not, Michael Thomas has made himself into a top-tier fantasy wide receiver this year. Last year, broke out as a rookie and really proved that he could do it on the NFL stage. Now, this year, you let go of Brandon Cooks. This adds even more flair to the pick of Michael Thomas. A lot of people are backing Michael Thomas, and I can see why. He's with Drew Brees, and oftentimes a lot of people will look at a first-year receiver that breaks out and say, hey, there might be a little bit of regression in the second year. There might be the sophomore slump. But for me, you look at one of the receivers that broke out in his first and second year for the Saints in the past, Marquise Colston. Michael Thomas reminds me a lot of him. So I think Michael Thomas is going to have another very good year. He's another safe guy, very much like the Jordy Nelsons, the T.Y. Hiltons. These guys have great offenses. They're going to score points. Thus, they're going to get the ball. And I think Michael Thomas and his receptions are going to go up without Brandon Cooks there. And I think, he's just going to be more involved in the offense and be more of the go-to guy in bigger situations because Drew Brees now trusts him. He is that number 1 guy, and he is going to be getting the football. At number 9, I have Dez Bryant. Dez Bryant, he's going to be back. He's going to be healthy. And I know a lot of people are saying, I'm staying away from Dez Bryant. He's injured. But if you saw Dez Bryant, especially in the playoffs, man, that guy is a maniac. He went out there. He gained some chemistry with Dak Prescott. I think the Cowboys are going to be more willing to let it roll, let it swing it. And I just feel like Dak Prescott is going to be slinging the rock a little bit more this year down the field. That's definitely going to benefit Dez Bryant. Dez Bryant's still that number 1 guy. They haven't brought in anyone else to replace him. And when that run game is rolling for the Cowboys, they're going to look over the top to Dez. Dez is definitely a great standard pick. He scores a ton of touchdowns every single year. As long as he stays healthy, he's a top-tier fantasy wide receiver once again. I think he's going to have a better and bounce-back year from last year, and you could expect him to be a top 10 fantasy wide receiver this year. At number 10, I have Amari Cooper. I think this is the year where Amari Cooper really shows up and really, becomes that guy that we thought he was in the draft, right? He's had 2 1,000-yard seasons already in 2 seasons, two for 2. This year, I think he's going to take it the next step. Last year, he was actually outproduced on paper by Michael Crabtree. This year, I think he's going to truly become that number 1 target. He has all the talent in the world. It seems like in the offseason, he's been really devoted to making himself a better football player, gaining himself a little bit of size to get off the line a little bit better. He has amazing quickness. And all I ask for Derek Carr in the Oakland offense is to pass him the ball a little bit more in the red zone, and you'll have an amazing pick on your hands. I think Amari Cooper could be that breakout wide receiver this year, very much like Mike Evans was last year, that becomes a top 3 fantasy receiver this year. That's how much I believe in Amari Cooper. At number 11, Doug Baldwin. I know, Doug Baldwin, kind of a Blaine Jane, name, whatever, right? A lot of people aren't excited to draft Doug Baldwin. But when you draft Doug Baldwin, you know what you're getting. You're getting the number 1 target in a Russell Wilson, Seattle Seahawks-led offense that will consistently produce for you and will have major big-time games occasionally down the season. You'll see 3 touchdown games from Doug Baldwin. You'll see 200-yard games from Doug Baldwin every once in a while, and those games win you weeks. Not to mention that Doug Baldwin was a top 10 fantasy wide receiver the past 2 seasons. So that's basically saying this guy is a number 1 fantasy wide receiver. I know he's on the Seahawks. I know he doesn't really seem like a top tier wide receiver, but the man produces, and Russell Wilson absolutely loves him. You factor in that Russell Wilson's going to be back 100% this year with a better ankle, and his feet will be moving around. That only benefits Doug Baldwin's game. They haven't brought in any other receiver to really help out and really, take away the target share for Doug Baldwin. So I love the Doug Baldwin pick this year because a lot of people are going to sleep on him once again in 2017. At number 12, I have Brandon Cooks to finish off tier number 3. Brandon Cooks is coming into the New England Patriots, and man, does this guy look like he's on fire. I think Brandon Cooks is going to take the league by storm this year. This is a guy that could rather be, a wide receiver 2 for you, or he could be the number 1 receiver in fantasy. That's how big of a ceiling Brandon Cooks has. In 3 seasons, he started his career in the NFL at the young age of 21 years old. He's still only 23 years old, and he's already had 2 1,000-yard seasons with the New Orleans Saints. He goes from a good offense to a very good offense to a great offense with Tom Brady. From Drew Brees to Tom Brady, not much of a difference there. He does have a little bit of more, people are worried about all the different targets that Brady has to throw to. I think Brandon Cooks is going to become, if not the go-to guy, at least the number 2, because this guy is electric. Every single time he gets the ball, he can take it to house. Whether it's underneath on a drag, whether it's on a screen or on a bomb, he's dangerous. He's almost uncoverable, and Bill Belichick has a man crush on him. So I feel like Brandon Cooks is going to be a huge fantasy asset for you in the 3rd round of your fantasy drafts. He could be one of the shocking big-time players in fantasy this year. In tier number 4, at number 13, I have DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins is a guy that disappointed many last year, was drafted very high. A lot of people were going, heavy wide receiver in their drafts, and DeAndre Hopkins was one of these guys that they did go after. And feel bad for you, but this year I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to bounce back in. Why? Well, the biggest reason being he doesn't have Brock Osweiler throwing him the ball. Brock Osweiler not only threw a terrible football, but he also didn't throw the ball down the field enough. He was captain check down. And with DeAndre Hopkins, you can't be captain check down. You have to throw the ball to him. You have to let him make some plays, and DeAndre Hopkins can make some plays. Tom Savage, Deshaun Watson, whoever it is, they're gonna throw the ball up to DeAndre Hopkins. You saw in the playoffs, even when Brock Osweiler gave him a few chances, he did make the plays, especially against the Raiders last year. I think Hopkins is going to have a better season this year and bounce back. He's not the safest pick, but if you do land DeAndre Hopkins in a spot that you feel is valuable, which I would say is probably about the 3rd to 4th round, I could see DeAndre Hopkins being, like Brandon Cooks, a big steal for you and another, having another top 10 fantasy wide receiver type of year. There's always the downside of, hey, you could have another year like last year, but sometimes it's worth the investment and worth the risk. Jarvis Landry is number 14, and it may seem high for a lot of you standard fans, but in PPR, Jarvis Landry is about as solid and consistent as you can get. He is Mr. Reception. Jarvis Landry is one of my favorite guys to draft and click that draft button for because I know what I'm getting. I'm getting a solid contributor to my fantasy team that's going to week in, week out produce. He's going to have about 7 catches a game for about 90 yards, and I'm going to be excited to have Jarvis Landry on my team because I know he's going to produce and he's never going to let me down. Jarvis Landry is arguably the best slot receiver in the game. Miami's offense is only getting better under Adam Gase, and I think Ryan Tannehill coming back is only going to help Jarvis Landry in 2017. At number 15, Demaryius Thomas. Demaryius Thomas is the slightly better receiver in Denver and the slightly, number 1 target over Emmanuel Sanders, number 2, which I'll get to Emmanuel quite soon, but Demaryius Thomas is a guy that's another Mr. Consistent. He had 90 receptions last year, and a lot of people felt like it was a down year for him. He still had 1,000 yards. This is a guy that's also been a top 15 fantasy receiver basically every single year he's played in the NFL. Demaryius Thomas is another guy that a lot of people are sleeping on simply because he had a down year last year. A down year, 90 receptions, 1,000 yards, down year. This year, I think he'll be a little bit better because they have Trevor Siemian or Paxton Lynch. Either way, Trevor Siemian, his second year as a pro, will probably be a little bit more ballsy and throw the ball a little bit more to Demaryius in his direction. And the second reason being Paxton Lynch would do the very same. He is a player that has that potential to throw the ball down the field and move outside the pocket and make plays. Demaryius Thomas makes plays. Simple as that. He'll catch balls. He'll be consistent for you on your fantasy team very much the same way as Jarvis Landry. At number 16 is Keenan Allen. Now, I've had two kind of bold picks and 2 kind of consistent picks. My consistent picks being Jarvis Landry and Demaryius Thomas. Bold picks being Hopkins and Allen. And we'll see some more bold and consistent picks as we go on. But Keenan Allen is a guy that I love. I've always loved Keenan Allen. I just feel like the guy needs to stay on the field. Every single time he's on the field, he produces. Every single time he's on the field, he shows his great potential. Every single time he's on the field, he's Phillip Rivers' go-to guy and one of the best offenses that we've seen the past 10 years. Keenan Allen, I feel, has the potential to lead the NFL in receptions. But he also has the downside of missing every game in the NFL season, which is a terrible direction. But I'm never willing to bet on somebody getting injured. And I feel like Keenan Allen has already had enough bad luck. So for me, I'm taking my chances on Keenan Allen, especially where he's going. He's going in the 4th round in a PPR league, which I feel is absolutely disgustingly, amazingly great value because he could lead the NFL in receptions. Draft Keenan Allen. Okay. At number 17, we have Alshon Jeffrey. He's in a better situation in Philadelphia. Carson Wentz is the quarterback. Carson Wentz wants that number 1 target. He's been waiting for Alshon. Alshon took a 1-year deal here for a reason. He has something to prove. He has something to prove to a lot of people that he is a number 1 receiver. He's one of the best talents in the NFL. And when he plays, he's dangerous. He averages nearly 90 yards a game. He's going to get his touchdowns, and I think he's going to flourish in the Eagles system. Now, this is another guy with slight injury risk, but never expect a guy to get injured. Never expect a guy to get injured. With Alshon Jeffrey, I think being in Philly is really going to motivate him. I think that contract is really going to motivate him, and I think he's going to have a big year here. Don't sleep on Alshon Jeffrey at all. And the next pick at number 18 in tier number 4 is Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins is very risky. I'll give you that. Very risky. He's had his injuries, but he's the only guy in Buffalo. The only guy. He's shown a ton of promise. I think he's slightly more valuable in standard leagues as he doesn't catch a ton of passes. He more catches the touchdowns and the long passes, but Sammy Watkins could be a great value for you in your draft because this is another guy who could blow up and be a top 5 fantasy receiver. He has the talent. He's shown the promise. It's just staying on the field and getting consistent target share. And with Sammy Watkins, they've gotten rid of Rex Ryan to run the rock a million times a game. Tyrod Taylor can throw the ball down the field, and that definitely helps Sammy Watkins. So I like Sammy Watkins in tier number 4 to finish it off at 18. In tier number 5 at 19 is Golden Tate. Love Golden Tate. I think he is a player that I'm never really excited to draft because he doesn't have a ton of upside, but he's a guy that, very much like Demaryius Thomas and Jarvis Landry, you know what you're going to get. He's the number one target in Detroit's offense. He's not going anywhere. Last year, he had 90-plus receptions. I think he could have 100 this year without Anquan Boldin being there and really a third target not really being there. So I feel like Golden Tate is going to have a big year this year once again, and he's not really going to have to deal with that slow start like he had the beginning of last year. I'm a fan of the Lions and what they did on offense this offseason. I'm also a fan of Matt Stafford. That means I'm a fan of Golden Tate, especially in PPR leagues. At number 20, another PPR monster, Larry Fitzgerald. Led the NFL in receptions last year. I'm not saying he'll do it again, but I'm saying he'll be another value for you this year. He could be another top 10 fantasy receiver season. Again, he's one of the greatest receivers of all time. Carson Palmer should bounce back from what was an off year last year. The Cardinals as a team should bounce back. Larry Fitzgerald is that number one go-to guy. He's the chain mover. He's the red zone threat. You know, they only really have John Brown as the other target, and John Brown isn't a Fitzgerald. He's not a PPR guy. Fitzgerald is that guy, and I think Fitzgerald, you know what you're going to get. It's consistency, week in, week out. He's also a guy that's led the NFL in receptions as just last year. He's another value for you in these drafts where a lot of people are looking at Fitzgerald. They're like, he's old. Carson Palmer. But no, even when Carson Palmer was bad, Fitzgerald was great. At number 21, I have Allen Robinson. Robinson was supposed to be amazing last year, and he let me down. A lot of that had to do with Blake Bortles. And yes, Blake Bortles is playing once again, but I believe that Allen Robinson will have a slight bounce back. I'm not saying he's going to have as big of a bounce back as I think DeAndre Hopkins will, but I feel like Allen Robinson could have a big bounce back. And if you really strike gold and he returns to form, this could be another top 5 wide receiver season for Allen Robinson. You never really know with this guy. He has a ton of talent. He's great down the field, and that's what you're really counting on. Watch and pay attention to see what type of shape Allen Robinson is in, how he's looking in camp, what he looks like in preseason, all that sort of stuff, and it could potentially add up to another great season in Jacksonville. I think he's going to be a good receiver for you. I'm just not completely sold that he's going to bounce completely back, but I could see him doing that. That's why I have him at 21, where I feel like that's a good value because you're taking, more than any other guy in this tier, he has the potential to be a number 1 fantasy receiver. And number 22 is Michael Crabtree. Michael Crabtree, along with Amari Cooper, one of the best duos in the NFL, actually outproduced Cooper last year. And again, he's going to be a guy that people are like, oh, it's Michael Crabtree. He's a possession receiver. He's not sexy. He doesn't run a 4.2. He's, the Raiders' second receiver, even though it's basically 1 and 1. Crabtree, the guy's consistent. Again, he catches a lot of touchdowns. He's on one of the best passing offenses in the NFL. I don't see any problem with Michael Crabtree at all. He's just another guy that you can count on and another guy that you can go to and roll out in your lineup. I like those sort of guys, and for whatever reason, the casual public of fantasy players don't love drafting guys like Michael Crabtree, Fitzgerald, Thomas, Landry, Tate. These guys get overlooked because they're not the Allen Robinsons. They're not the Sammy Watkins. They don't provide the big flash of the top 10 potential, even though they've done it before, even though they're consistent week in, week out. Even though Crabtree was awesome last year, people are still going to overlook him, and that's your chance to draft him. At number 23 is Terrell Pryor. Now, this is a guy that I feel has the huge potential, but also has a relatively safe floor. I really like Pryor this year because I think in Washington's offense, he's going to be the number 1 receiver. He's replacing Deshaun/Pierre Garçon. They have Jamison Crowder. They have Jordan Reed. They have 3 go-to targets. Pryor's going to be the number 1. We saw the effectiveness he had on the Cleveland Browns offense, even in Cleveland where they had no quarterback. There's no offense like a Kirk Cousins run offense for him in Cleveland. I think he's going to be great. I think he's going to score touchdowns. I think he's going to be an absolute force for you on your fantasy team. At number 24, I have Julian Edelman. Edelman is a machine, man. The guy is a PPR machine. He's going to do it. Don't worry about Brandon Cooks. Don't worry about Gronk. no one loves Edelman more than Tom Brady. And that's all I really need to say. He's going to be another guy that you're going to draft and you're going to be like, Edelman, Landry, Fitzgerald, all these guys, week in, week out, consistent production for you in fantasy leagues, especially in PPR. And to finish off tier number 5, I have at number 25, Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders is being grossly overlooked in fantasy drafts this year. It's absolutely disgusting, actually, to look at Emmanuel Sanders' stats and his production throughout his career and his fantasy finishes, and then look at his ADP in drafts, which is average draft position. Look at his ADP, and then tell me why that relates to the production and to his situation. He's still arguably the number 1 receiver with Demaryius Thomas in Denver. There's no third target on that offense. There's no other guy to go to other than those 2 players. What is the reasoning of drafting Emmanuel Sanders that far back? Draft him higher. He's consistent. He's a guy that can give you big games, and he's a go-to guy. And if Simeon, like I said with Demaryius, takes a step forward and kind of becomes more of the passer than he was last year, and this team is better, then Emmanuel Sanders will have an even better year than he did last year, and you're already getting value if you draft him where he's being drafted and you expect the last year's result. So I love the Emmanuel Sanders value this year. At tier number 6, let's start off with number 26, Martavis Bryant. Martavis Bryant could be a boom-bust candidate. Obviously, he has the potential to get suspended, the potential to get injured, blah, 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 blah. But he also has the potential to have 10 touchdowns and 1,400 yards because the guy has out-of-this-world talent. He's got great size, great hands, great speed. He looks motivated, and he might be the guy in the middle rounds. I feel like is going at a pretty decent value right now, but he looks motivated. He looks good in the offseason, and he might be a guy that for a boomer bust pick, I'm willing to go out of my way to reach for because I think that he could have huge potential in the Steelers offense this year. 27 is Stephon Diggs, another guy that's kind of been banged up every once in a while, but when he's playing, he's effective, and I think Sam Bradford and this offense is going to be more efficient with a better run game, an offensive line that's improved, and that will help Stephon Diggs out. As long as he stays on the field, I think Stephon Diggs could be another guy that kind of surprises a lot of people and moves up some spots in fantasy production this year. We see the talent, obviously. He has big games in him. It's just a matter of being more consistent. And if he can get that together, he's definitely going to be worth the ADP. At number 28 is Willie Snead. I love Willie Snead this year. I think he's going at a great place because he's going to be the number 2 receiver in New Orleans. There's no more Brandon Cooks. Willie Snead's taking his place, and I think he is a great slot receiver. And what we know about slot receivers in PPR is that they catch a lot of passes, especially when you're in a Drew Brees offense. So that's all I really got to say about Willie Snead. I believe in the talent, I believe in the offense, and I believe in the opportunity for him to succeed. At number 29 is Davante Adams. Had a huge year last year in touchdown production. I expect that to kind of calm down a little bit. I'm not the biggest fan of Davante Adams' skill or actual, ability, but his opportunity is so great, the situation is so great, and his chemistry with Aaron Rodgers is so good that he's kind of a good value where he's being picked. Don't reach for him at all. He's not the greatest value in the world, but if you do end up picking him as your second or third receiver, most likely your third. If you drafted Davante Adams as your third receiver, I'd be very happy with you. Second receiver, I'd be like, okay, that's probably where most people are drafting him. If you get him as your third receiver, that's a great pick because he has the potential to have a lot of touchdowns, to have a lot of yards. He's in a great offense. It's just a matter of I think he won't be as good as last year, but that's not saying that he's not going to be fantastic. Tier number 7 at number 30 is Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill obviously has all the potential in the world to be a top receiver. He has amazing speed, amazing ability after the catch, the best returner in football. But can he be a consistent receiver? Can he be a PPR guy? And I have my doubts, especially with Alex Smith at quarterback. I'm not really touching Tyreek Hill because I feel like a lot of people are going to reach on him because they know how talented he is. And don't get me wrong, I know how talented he is. But I just don't feel like the opportunity in this offense is going to be good enough for me to really draft him where he's being drafted. At number 31 is Jamison Crowder. I really believe that Jamison Crowder is the next Antonio Brown. He has all the skills. He has the quickness in and out of his cuts, great route runner, great speed down the field, even comparable size to him. I think Crowder could be a huge breakout star in fantasy this year. He's going to kill people in the slot, and as long as he gets more receptions this year, I think he's definitely a safe pick. He had a number of touchdowns last year, which it's impossible to predict touchdowns, but I think the yardage totals for him, being that he's going to be the number 2 or number 3 target in this offense, is going to be up. So I think his yardage will be up. His touchdowns may be about the same, and hopefully his catches are up as well. And number 32 is Jeremy Maclin. I'm a fan of picking Maclin. I've noticed that I've picked Maclin quite a bit, and it's mostly because he's on the Baltimore Ravens. I know how Joe Flacco is, and actually at the moment of this recording, Joe Flacco is actually going to be out for a little bit, I hear. But when he does come back, I know that Maclin is going to be a solid pick for me because I feel like every single time a veteran receiver comes into Baltimore, he gets a fair share of targets. He gets basically work overload, and I feel like that's what's going to happen with Maclin. He's still a quality receiver. He's still a good receiver, and I think that a lot of people are overlooking him because he's been a little bit banged up. He's been on Kansas City, a place where they don't throw the ball a lot. Baltimore threw the ball more than anyone last year. And if they do that, and if Maclin's a number 1 receiver, he's going to be a steal in drafts. And number 33 is Pierre Garçon. I love this pick as well, and I've been picking Garçon quite a bit. He's going in the same range as Maclin because I think in the Kyle Shanahan system, he's had his best seasons of his career there. And also in San Fran, he's the number 1 clear-cut guy, the go-to. No one else is there. No Deshaun, no Jordan Reed. It's Pierre Garçon, Pierre Garçon, Pierre Garçon all day long. Brian Hoyer loves to force the ball to his number 1 target, and I think Garçon is going to benefit from that. Tier number 8, Brandon Marshall, Kelvin Benjamin, Deshaun Jackson, Dante Moncrief. Brandon Marshall's going to be the number 2 to Odell. He's going to be in a better offense. They like to pass the ball. He's not going to have the number 1 corner on him. I think he's going to benefit from that. Kelvin Benjamin is still the number 1 target in Carolina. If Cam Newton and the offensive line can protect Cam Newton, Kelvin Benjamin could be a good steal. I think he's going to score a lot of touchdowns once again. I think he's going to be a good standard pick. I'm just not sold on him as a PPR guy. At number 35, Deshaun Jackson. I think he's going to have a lot of big plays. He's a good standard pick. He never catches a lot of passes. But you know with Deshaun Jackson, you're going to get huge games, and that's what you're getting with him. At number 36 is Dante Moncrief. I like Moncrief this year. I think he could be another guy that breaks out. I picked him last year, and he got hurt, and that sucked. But every single time Moncrief played, he scored a touchdown, it seemed like. He was very consistent with getting in the end zone. Andrew Luck loves him. He's the clear-cut number 2 target on that offense, and I think Moncrief could be a steal for you in your drafts. In tier number 9, it's Quincy Enunwa, John Brown, Randall Cobb, Adam Thielen, and Jordan Matthews. All of these guys I've found myself picking. Quincy Enunwa, I found myself picking more than really anyone. A lot of people forget that this guy's going to be the number 1 receiver in New York. Despite that team being the shits, they are going to pass the ball no matter who the quarterback is because they're going to be losing. Quincy Enunwa is going to get a lot of targets. He's going to get a lot of yardage at the end of the games because he's a young receiver. Nobody really knows him, and I feel like he's being overlooked. So I'd pick Quincy Enunwa at the end of your drafts. John Brown is another guy that I think a lot of people are overlooking because he was supposed to break out last year, and he didn't. He had some injuries with his health or like some issues with his health, but I think he'll be back. He looks better in the offseason. He's fast. He's a downfield threat, and I think a lot of people are overlooking him as the number 2 target in Arizona, an offense that's pretty good. At number 39 is Randall Cobb. I think Randall Cobb's going to have a little bit better year than he did last year, and that means that he's going to be a good value at this range. He's always a consistent PPR guy for you, averaging around 75 to 80 catches, and I think that's solid, especially for like a wide receiver 4 that you can just plug in. At number 40, I have Adam Thielen, who I really like. I think he's a very talented receiver. He had a very under-the-radar good year last year and was arguably even better than Stephon Diggs. Sam Bradford really loves him. He's a good underneath PPR sort of guy. Of course, he's that classic white receiver mold of a guy that can kind of take the ball, make a couple guys miss, but he's not going to beat you deep or anything. And Adam Thielen is kind of a guy that a lot of people are going to shy away from because he's not a sexy pick or anything. He's not a big star rookie, but he's going to be good for you in PPR leagues. At number 41 is Jordan Matthews. Jordan Matthews is another PPR guy that a lot of people overlook. He did have a down year last year, but I think Jordan Matthews is going to really benefit this year from having Alshon Jeffrey on his team. He's going to have the capability of playing in the slot where full-time, where he's best at. And I think from Alshon Jeffrey drawing the number one coverage, Jordan Matthews is really going to benefit. And he's another guy that I've been drafting because I feel like just scheme-wise, he's going to get a lot of production out of that. Tier number 10, I have guys like Cameron Meredith, Tyrell Williams, Corey Coleman, Devontae Parker, Kenny Britt, Eric Decker, Mike Wallace, Robert Woods, and Kenny Stills. Now, at number 42, I have Cameron Meredith. He's going to be the number one target in Chicago as far as I know. Had a good season last year, even stepped up and had good games when Alshon Jeffrey wasn't there, so you know he's legit. No matter who the quarterback is, I think Meredith is going to produce. And he's another guy that has breakout potential, very much the same as Quincy Enunwa. Tyrell Williams is another guy. Mike Williams is down. Tyrell Williams is going to be the number 2 receiver. A lot of people forget that he had an amazing year last year for the Chargers with Keenan Allen out. Keenan Allen is back, but Tyrell Williams will be the number 2 receiver, and I think he'll have a lot of big plays in him this year. At number 44 is Corey Coleman. Corey Coleman for the Browns is going to be maybe their number 1 or number 2 receiver. I have him number 1 on my rankings for the Browns because I think he's basically a rookie that has the potential to be a guy that is a number 3 or number 2 fantasy receiver because he showed his flashes last year. He showed his capabilities. He was a first-round pick for a reason. And the Browns are going to be losing a lot again. So Coleman is going to get his fair share of targets. Let's talk about Kenny Britt at 46. Kenny Britt, again, very much like Corey Coleman. I just feel like Corey Coleman has more potential there. But Kenny Britt could very well be the guy that kind of slips under the radar, that veteran that slips under the radar that becomes the number 1 receiver in Cleveland. Devontae Parker at 45 has all the talent in the world. He just has to put it together, and he just has to stay on the field, and I think he could have some good production. Going to Kenny Stills, his teammate at number 50. Kenny Stills is basically, him and Devontae are vying for the position, so pay attention to who is getting that number 2 position at wide receiver for the Dolphins, and whoever does is going to be their big play touchdown guy, so pay attention to those guys. Eric Decker, Mike Wallace, and Robert Woods, all guys in good situations. Eric Decker is the only Tennessee receiver I have on my rankings. I feel like he is the veteran that's going to come in, and he's going to be the possession receiver for Marcus Mariota. I think he's going to be an under-the-radar pick at the end of your drafts. Just, hey, it's Eric Decker. He's a good receiver. He's always been good. And I think he's going to produce for Marcus Mariota and a Titans team that I think is going to be much, much better and maybe even make the playoffs. Number 48, Mike Wallace, another big play guy. And number 49, Robert Woods. He's the only guy in Los Angeles for the Rams. Somebody needs to catch the ball. I think it's going to be Robert Woods. Other guys to keep an eye out for, make sure you keep an eye out for rookies John Ross and Corey Davis. Also take a look at Will Fuller, who I think could have a bounce back, or not a bounce back, but kind of improve upon his rookie year with the Texans. Taylor Gabriel, who has a lot of big play potential in Atlanta. Ted Ginn, who could come in and kind of replace the Brandon Cooks role in New Orleans. Kevin White, who could be the number 1 or number 2 receiver in Chicago after being injured a lot. Rashard Matthews in Tennessee, who was the number 1 guy in Tennessee last year. A lot of people are forgetting about him. Tyler Lockett in Seattle, who's a big play guy that has a ton of quickness and ability. And Marvin Jones for Detroit, who had a lot of weeks at the beginning of the season where he blew up but then kind of fell off the map. And he's going to be the number 2 target in Detroit. So those are the top 50 fantasy receivers for July 2017. I hope you guys enjoyed these rankings. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more fantasy football. The next video coming up will be the top 20 tight ends in fantasy football 2017. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, subscribe to the channel, like the video. Peace out.